The Browns are in a different situation as they ramp up their offseason activities here, getting ready and prepping for 2025. And that's what is the expectation of rookies drafted high, because that has not been the case in 3 years. We'll talk about it. Browns 3D on the OBR starts now. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound Browns 3D, brought to you and on the Browns streaming network. Make sure you subscribe to the OBR on, of course, YouTube, and of course, the OBR over on Twitch. We appreciate everybody for the support here for us all, whether it's reading the written content daily or coming out for the nightly streaming here on the OBR, beginning every night with me, your host, Jeff Lloyd, here on Browns 3D. You will have OBR Weekly joining me, joining after, of course, Fred Greetham and Barry Bride. In one of the many things that obviously hurt this franchise over the last few seasons, from the Deshaun Watson trade, not just his play, not the contract that was given to him, but it was the fact that, this kind of gutted the Browns roster, certainly gutted the future of the roster, hamstrung it for several seasons with all the lost draft assets that were moved to the Houston Texans in the acquisition of Watson himself. In the past three drafts, the Browns' highest picks 3 years ago were the third round. 2 years ago were the third round as well. And then last year, of course, Mike Hall in the second round. The Browns this draft, 2025, Mason Graham in round 1, Carson Swessinger in round 2, Quinshon Judkins in round 2, Harold Fannin in round 3, Dylan Gabriel in round 3 as well. Round 4, the selection of Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee, and of course, round 5, bringing the Browns SHEDEUR Sanders. We haven't really gotten the opportunity to have these conversations over the last 3 years. Rookie expectations, rookie pressure on the rookies. What is acceptable as far as what can be expected from these rookies? The quarterbacks, could cancel themselves out as far as, playing time and opportunity for playing time. I believe there's an opportunity we're going to get to see both. But for Graham, Judkins, Swessinger, Fannin, and Sampson, they come into a really, really good situation as far as, they're not necessarily blocked as far as, a path to playing time. We all feel Mason Graham will probably be a starter. Unfortunately, for the Browns as a whole, there's probably an opportunity for Carson Swessinger to start immediately. The running back room is probably, going to go full on committee approach early, unless or until somebody identifies, that they are just performing at a level that Cleveland cannot afford to take them, or take, I should say, snaps or reps away from them. Fannin, it's certainly interesting because with David Njoku on the last year of his contract, what Harold can do here, I don't think it's going to have much influence one way or the other as to whether or not the Browns and Njoku get a deal done this summer or early in the fall. But there is certainly, with the love and the amount of 12 personnel that Kevin Stefanski has played in his time here as the Cleveland Browns head coach, it certainly gives you that opportunity, for Fannin to find, a path to some early success and hopefully sustainable success as a rookie. Sampson was just too good to pass up when he was available, certainly. And, between Ford and, of course, fellow rookie Judkins and Sampson, what is the expectation? How many legit carries could be had, for three running backs? And Jerome, for certainly in a contract year, probably going to do everything he can, certainly to, get himself on the field for as many snaps as possible. The door and Dylan Gabriel, we've had these conversations at length. Anybody that's trying to tell you they think how the quarterback room is going to work for the Browns, we're all just giving what we think. Way too early in the game to try to believe that there is a preconceived plan for the way the quarterback room would play out for the Browns this fall into winter, of course. The kid is here, certainly, and, basically wants to resurrect his career within this league. Joe Flacco is probably looking for one more fall in the sun, knowing that he still has the capabilities to play in this league. Can he perform to the level that he was performing for the Browns in 23, which was good? It certainly was. Turnovers were an issue, which has kind of been something that's always kind of plagued Joe. There's been times where Joe Flacco has just been an insanely good quarterback, but you kind of always get to that interception number, and it's always been, basically the Achilles heel for Joe Flacco in any sustainable success, as far as taking him from very good quarterback to putting him maybe into the conversations, of top tier elite quarterback within the league. The kids are going to do everything they can to find a path to the field. SHEDEUR Sanders has probably never sat a game in his life. Dylan Gabriel has never really sat much in his life either. These guys don't know what it's not like to be preparing to be the guy. And while Kenny Pickett and Joe Flacco are certainly veterans within the NFL, I don't think you're going to see anything from SHEDEUR Sanders or Dylan Gabriel that's going to essentially concede. These guys are going to prepare like they think they are going to be the week one starter. It's all these two guys have ever known. And again, it is a unique position where these guys are, hopefully trying to, turn this franchise around as a whole, as teammates, while also competing against each other. Certainly a tricky scenario. And you hope it goes smoothly. You think it could go smoothly, but you could understand, if at times maybe we hear it's maybe not the best relationship. And it would make sense, with two guys who, have this competitive drive, this competitive fire in this situation where, they are competing against each other. They are competing against two guys, one with, a little bit amount of NFL experience and one with a tremendous amount of NFL experience and success. How they handle it is, again, it's going to be a mystery because I think everybody has their preconceived notions of how it's going to play out, but all of that is based on, conjecture and just, assumption. We know Joe is somewhat comfortable with the offense. He's already been here once. Kenny Pickett, certainly, thought to be the golden child and the next in line in Pittsburgh of, the lengthy runs of their starting quarterbacks. And basically, as, quickly as it started, for Kenny in Pittsburgh is as quickly as it flamed out for Kenny in Pittsburgh. Played sparingly last year for the Eagles. Wasn't terrible. Really, really good football team, obviously. And, Kenny's certainly here at a crossroads. And it seems like there's a lot of guys on the Browns who are in contract years. And obviously that is the case for Kenny Pickett as well. So what Kenny can do with this opportunity certainly is interesting. You know, I remain on record that, I'm playing the rookies because I'm not sure that this team is one that's going to contend for the playoffs regardless of who the quarterback is. So Joe Flacco going out there, and if look, Joe went out there and you give him the first 6 games, and somehow the Browns went 4-2, 3-3, whatever, which I don't believe is going to happen. Then you understand continuing to roll with Joe as the starter because you probably realize that there's not going to be any relationship with Joe Flacco after this season. I mean, got to be 41, I think, in January, whatever it is. If it's Kenny, can Kenny get you to 3-3 and 4-2? Certainly, there's a lot of other variables that go into that. Does the defense rebound from 2024 and look more like they did in 2023? Does the offensive line remain healthy? Does DeJuan Jones make that jump that, you can refer to him and speak of him as, a legit left tackle in the NFL? Look, he doesn't have to be top 10. I don't know if the expectations for DeJuan Jones are, that he's just going to go out and, all of a sudden start to be spoken about like an all-pro player. We've talked a million times about, how difficult the run game and run blocking is for DeJuan Jones just due to his size, which is also one of the reasons he's, shown to be so well in pass pro. He gets his hands on you. He's like a damn grizzly bear and you're gone and you're disintegrated. Ask TJ Watt. For the pure speed rushers, if DeJuan Jones can get to his set and get to his spot, it's going to take you another second, if not more, to run around him at 6'9". We'll just say 365. Reports are that DeJuan Jones's weight is really, really under control so far through this offseason, which certainly bodes well for him. With the offensive line returning in health and maybe playing well, is that reinvigorate the running game. That struggled at times in 2023 and certainly struggled almost all of 2024. You look, for Mason Graham, and certainly, there are veterans here, the early down rotation at defensive tackle certainly would factor Shelby Harris, Juwan Briggs, Mason Graham, Mike Hall. You believe that Mason Graham is, set to be entrenched as a starter on the interior. Definitely interesting for Cleveland to finally put this type of investment into an interior defensive line player. It's just been something and anybody who's been listening to me for years, it's just something that just never truly seemed like the focus that at least I thought it should be. And I know others agree with me. So, and you look at it and you look at the future of that position, of course, with Briggs, Hall, and of course now Mason Graham. And can they, get to the point, where they can start, having guys on the interior hold their own and everybody else can fly around and make the plays, Myles Garrett and backside pursuit, of course, and, how the linebackers can perform, if they are kept clean. Grant Delpit, always in contention to be a leading tackler on this defense with his ability around the line of scrimmage. Is there expectations for Mason Graham? They probably are. Absolutely. And it's always different with interior defensive line play because it's not necessarily so much you can just say, numbers and production numbers or statistics, certainly, which don't really ever truly tell the tale, of course. You certainly don't think you have, the next Aaron Donald joining your defensive line. but you're certainly hoping that you're going to get, a very, very integral part of a guy that can not only maybe, change the way your defensive line plays, but, a guy who will be here 5 years that, hopefully can kind of become entrenched and maybe finally truly have that type of player on the interior that can play on a commensurate level to Myles Garrett on the outside. The role for Swessinger certainly is his, and it's basically going to be his story to tell about, what Carson Swessinger can do as a rookie linebacker for the Cleveland Browns. If he is not getting immediate playing time or a ton of playing time, it's probably because it maybe hasn't, gone too well right off the bat or out of the gate for Swessinger. This team obviously loses a lot with, Jeremiah Usu-Koromoa being out for the season for medical reasons. And this team certainly takes a hit from a leadership standpoint. It takes a hit from just production and an overall great, great player at the linebacker position. Certainly loses something from, kind of like, the guy who wears the green dot. It's something that, Jeremiah worked really hard to become, what he was in 2023 and what he was early in 2024. And it's something that's certainly going to be greatly missed. It was greatly missed to close out 2023. And the question would be, obviously, Swessinger, who, looks the part by any means whatsoever, the size, 6'2 plus and 240, which, isn't your standard NFL linebacker anymore. Linebackers usually today in today's NFL just don't usually carry that much weight. But you look at Swessinger and, he doesn't look like it's, I don't think anybody's looking at Carson Swessinger and recommending, he's got to cut some weight. He did everything for the UCLA defense last year that one could possibly ask from someone. Not always easy to do that in the NFL, of course. And this might be one of the advantages that, I'd say all the rookies from this 2025 class for Cleveland is going to have. It's a huge advantage because, again, this is a team where the pressure may not be that high as far as what they can achieve in this season. So it is a perfect opportunity to be breaking in a very large amount of young players. So for Swessinger and this opportunity to be open on the inside and, to learn on the job certainly seems, feasible. And, he certainly seems capable, to be able to do just that. The rest of the room looked good when you basically had JOK at the top of the tree, and then you kind of trickled down Hicks, Bush, and again, whatever that situation is going to turn out to be. Mahmoud Diabate, obviously, and Buki Watson, of course, Jerome Baker. But Swessinger is the guy. Where he was drafted automatically puts him in the position for, to be the guy. So, yeah, there's going to be pressure. But for a guy like Swessinger and for a lot of and most of these young players on this team, it should be the opportunity to go out there and play freely. And, sometimes, yes, learn on the job, learn from your mistakes. Whereas if it was a team with a lot riding on this season, you would be in a different situation where, you wouldn't necessarily be able to, have rookies make mistakes because a lot would be riding for, the Chiefs and other teams that maybe necessarily always can't afford to have, younger players learning the NFL life on the fly. I'm very excited about the rookie running backs. And I think the pressure is there in some ways. And I think the pressure is there a little bit more. And it's certainly probably going to come from the fan base because it's just going to be different because it's not Nick. And, I'm not going to give the fan base a hard time over this. It's Nick Chubb is the type of player that's going to take everyone a little time to get over. So if these guys, have any struggles, certainly the fan base and, we all know the names are going to be the ones still wondering why Nick Chubb was not signed or, what Nick Chubb is doing at the time. But these kids can play and, what they've done in college certainly speaks for themselves. Judkins was just a machine for 3 years, 2 at Ole Miss, and of course 1 in Columbus. And Sampson getting the full-time opportunity this past fall in Knoxville just absolutely blew it up. You combine that with Jerome Ford, but, I think most of what, this season will be about in the tail of the running backs is certainly going to be, what have Judkins and what have Sampson done as rookies. Again, the opportunity to maybe learn on the fly here a little bit. If the Browns and the belief is, that they most likely will not contend, you're playing with house money. Just go out there and let it rip and see where, let the chips fall where they may. But getting, of course, Judkins and Sampson established and then, one more offseason, one more draft class in 26. And then hopefully, you've got yourself in that prime position where you're, thinking that you are going to legit start making a run again and a consistent run for years to come. Fannon, again, I think he just brings a lot of interestingness to him in the fact that he can do so many things, with the tush push remaining in the NFL. If it's something the Browns, who did vote in favor of keeping the tush push in the game, and I know a lot of people misconstrued that. The Browns did not vote against the tush push. They vote in favor of keeping it. Kind of made me think today when I saw that, well, hey, maybe that's something, Harold Fannin can do. I don't think I'd want to do it with Dylan Gabriel. I don't think I'd want to do it with SHEDEUR Sanders. But if, hey, you think maybe you want to do it with Harold Fannin, not to mention, the ability to play, from a slot position, the ability to play inline tight end, the ability to play as an outside receiver. And he's certainly different from David, who is, just an absolute freak athlete. And I've said it before on Fannin, and I'll continue to say it. I think, one of his best athletic traits is his just overall on-field intelligence. Kind of sees things at a quicker rate than defenders. Harold Fannin is definitely a guy where, having played many positions, through high school and then trying to find out what they were exactly going to do with him in college, he kind of took his overall football experience and, a lot of knowledge of the game overall has certainly been something that he has been able to put into, what his product was, as he was finishing out his career at Bowling Green, where he was just an absolute animal, and it wasn't just MAC domination, you name whoever Bowling Green played. And the goal for every team who played Bowling Green was to take Harold Fannin out of it. It didn't happen. So I'm sure, Cleveland wants to get a legit look at Harold Fannin. And, look, the rumblings have been kind of quiet. And I think the Browns would want to extend David Njoku. But the question, of course, is, it's money. It's what it is with everything, of course, right? And we'll see. I mean, when it's always come to this type of stuff with David, it's been a little difficult. If you all remember that Drew Rosenhaus back and forth back, a couple of years ago, and how that didn't work out for him, and the Browns ultimately gave him the contract that they, felt he deserved. But it certainly could, make for some fun looks from a 12 personnel setup, of course, with David, and of course with Fannin. Whatever running back you want to put on the field, whether it's Judd, whether it's Ford, whether it's Sampson, with Tillman and of course Judy on the outside. There's got to be a lot of fun that can be drawn up right now on whiteboards within that Cleveland Browns room with Kevin Stefanski and of course Tommy Rees, first-year offense coordinator. And again, I think that's just why I'm where I'm at with just playing. I mean, if there's just going to be so much youth on the field, I don't know necessarily what playing Pickett and or Flacco does. I understand you have to feel and make everyone in that locker room feel it with you, that you aren't just, punting on this season and just trying to develop a bunch of players and then have one more hopefully strong all season and, test your wares from there. Certainly not failure, to Joel and Posick and Wyatt Teller and Jack Conklin and, certainly some of the veterans on the defensive side of the ball. So, I mean, you want to be competitive, but you also have to be realistic about how competitive you can actually be. And, that's why I keep coming back to just playing the kids. And if we go, starting next week with OTAs, then, mandatory mini camp, then, of course, training camp, preseason, data. And I mean, we get to this point, where we've all seen everything with our own two eyes, through August into late August. And whether it's a Dylan Gabriel or it's SHEDEUR Sanders or it's Kenny Pickett, who have been the ones that have been, crazy successful or the most successful out of the bunch. How do you say that, that's not the guy? There should not be any predetermined, plan, thought as to who is lining up under center week 1 when the Cleveland Browns host the Cincinnati Bengals. This job, in my opinion, should truly be as open as it needs to be. And you have somebody, one of these 4, just step up and claim it. I don't think Kenny Pickett at this point in his career is enough of a guy that you can just establish that it's him. I do not think that you can look at Joe Flacco and just say, we think Joe can give us 17 games and get us to the playoffs. And this isn't a knock on any one of these quarterbacks. As I'm talking about this, we're talking about all the rookies that I think should be able to give you some sort of impact this year. But to be completely honest with you, to think that 7 rookies are all going to hit the ground running is probably a little bit, fantasy land. Can Ronnie Hickman lock down a free safety position? Can DeJuan Jones show us what we're hoping to see out of a left tackle? Can Cedric Tillman become a consistent week in, week out guy like we saw for that brief stretch last fall? There's a lot of factors that go into determining just how successful the Cleveland Browns can be in 2025. And for me, in terms of what a successful 2025 season could be, I think a lot of it has to do with, how we are going to look, how this rookie class played, how DeJuan Jones did, how did Cedric Tillman do, how did Ronnie Hickman do? A lot of moving parts, a lot of newness to the Cleveland Browns 2025 roster. And that's the part, I'm certainly looking forward to. because I think a lot of it is going to have to do with, as the kids go, so may the fates and fortune of whatever the 2025 season will be for your Cleveland Browns. As always, we thank everybody for all the support we get here at the OBR, whether it's coming on out and reading the written content daily from our fabulous and fantastic group of writers, or the OBR streaming network kicking off every evening at 6 o'clock with me here hosting Browns 3D. Again, we could not be more thankful for the support from all of you. Make sure you are subscribed to the OBR on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed to the OBR on Twitch. And this has been Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. You got Fred Greetham and Barry McBride jumping in afterwards at 7 o'clock for OBR Weekly. Make sure you give the fine gentleman a listen. This has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. Browns 3D on the OBR, and we will talk to you all tomorrow.